Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and in 1992, under SEC Commissioner Roy Kramer, the Southeastern Conference added Arkansas and South Carolina and split their 12-team conference into two 6-team divisions, and pretty much from the get-go, it has always been kind of wacky in the way that it went. So, if you look at the way the power struggle between the East and the West has, it's never been in perfect harmony. They've never felt like two equal but separate divisions battling it out for supremacy. It always seems to kind of be one or the other that's been on top. When I was growing up in the 1990s, the SEC East was dominant, with teams like Steve Spurrier's Florida Fun and Gun offense, Philip Fulmer's Tennessee. Georgia was always really competitive under Mark Richt as we got into the 2000s. The East was the dominant division in the SEC because mainly of those three teams. When you get into the late 2000s and now 2010s, it's the SEC West. Now, one team from one division beating one team from another division doesn't inherently prove anything, but if we look at just the SEC championship game, you had Alabama winning the very first one over Florida in 1992, and the East pretty much winning the rest of the decade, winning 6 straight. They kind of traded into the 2000s. Now, in 2008, Florida beat Alabama in a number 1 versus number 2 kind of de facto national championship game. The East hasn't won a single SEC championship game since. I'm filming this before the 2017 SEC championship between Auburn and Georgia, for the record, so I don't know how that one ends, but up and through the 2016 season, the SEC West has won every single conference championship game since then. During that span, the West is a perfect 8-0 against the East in these games, and with every game except for the 2012 Alabama-Georgia game, where number 2 versus number 3, and also a de facto national championship game, they haven't even really been that close. The West has pretty much dominated most of these games. During that span, Alabama, Auburn, and LSU have beaten Missouri, Georgia, Florida, and South Carolina in the SEC championship games, and Alabama and Auburn have combined for 5, each of those going on to play in either the playoff or for the national championship. And it's not just a case of Alabama's in the West, so the West is obviously better than the East. Since 2010, every single team in the SEC West has been ranked in the top 5 of at least one poll during the season. The SEC East only boasts 4 teams that have done that. During that time, 4 teams from the SEC West have been the number 1 team in the country, while not a single one from the East has. Missouri and Texas A&M have only been in the conference since 2012, so their stats only start counting there, because that makes sense. And I know the term New Year's Six is a relatively new one over the last few years with the invention of the college football playoff, but if you look at the New Year's Six Bowl since 2010, the SEC East is only 1-2 in those bowl games. South Carolina lost the 2010 Peach Bowl, Florida lost the 2013 Sugar Bowl, and Missouri won the 2014 Cotton Bowl. Since 2010, the SEC West in New Year's Six games, 12-10. Now, of course, that number is slightly skewed, as is the 4-3 mark in national championship games, considering that Alabama and LSU played for the 2011 title in the 2012 BCS championship game. But still, it's pretty clear where the talent and the coaching and the everything has been in the conference since 2010. I'm using 2010 because that's the start of this decade, but obviously Alabama won a national championship in 2009, LSU won a national championship in 2007. And this isn't just, once again, Alabama's great and everybody else is just there. Every single team was counted in a New Year's Six game over the last 6 or 7 years for the SEC West. And there is a real chance that if Nick Saban had left Alabama after, say, 2011, that all of these teams in the West may have had a legitimate shot to win a national championship, which is kind of crazy if you think about it. So with the West over the last decade or so being so clearly much more dominant than the East, the question is it time for the SEC to update their divisions? Now, obviously, when you split divisions by geography and you have one division that's the East and one division that's the West, the idea that Missouri is more Eastern than Auburn is ridiculous. Obviously, if you just wanted to fix the problem, you could really just move Auburn into the East, move Missouri into the West, and that would solve it. The East would instantly become more competitive. Auburn would reignite rivalries with Florida. They would still have the Georgia rivalry. You could protect the Iron Bowl as the crossover between Alabama and Auburn, but of course you would lose the Auburn-LSU rivalry and the Alabama-Tennessee rivalry that a lot of older generation fans of both of those programs still hold near and dear to their heart. Now, I want it to be known that I did graduate from the University of Alabama, and I have a pretty controversial and borderline heretical thought. I'm fine with Auburn moving to the East and losing the Iron Bowl as a protected crossover. In fact, over the last decade, this rivalry has gotten not good. It's not healthy, and both fan bases really do hate each other. Every year, it happened again like a week or two ago as of the filming of this video. Every year it seems like there's fights or shootings or stabbings between fan bases yelling about each other about who is the better team or because one fan base is mocking the other. Of course, we all know about what happened with Updike poisoning the trees at Toomer's Corner. Things have gotten really heated between the rivals, and they did take a really long break early in the rivalry, and right now if they took another break, I don't really know if there would be any love lost between the two teams, but not playing each other for such high stakes every single year, I think could be a good thing. And if you want things in the conference to be more competitive, then go to a 9-game conference schedule and rotate and play more teams more of the time. And one more heretical idea that I have personally that will never be implemented: destroy the crossover rivals. If Auburn were to move into the East, their only crossover rival would need to be Alabama. Everything else, do we really care about the Mississippi State-Kentucky crossover rival? Is Ole Miss Vanderbilt something we really need? LSU and Florida, neither of them want to play each other every single year. So instead, go to a 9-conference game schedule, play your 6 division opponents, and rotate the other 3, and therefore you're going to play every other team every single... If you are in school, before you graduate as a senior, you will have played every single team in your conference, which I think is the whole point of a conference. It also eliminates complaints from people like Tennessee, who is upset that they have to play Nick Saban's Alabama team every single year, while Georgia and Florida don't. Though Florida has to play LSU and Georgia has to play Auburn, you could kind of say it's kind of balanced out, but I do think it would eliminate a lot of that unfair scheduling idea. Now, that's never going to happen. I understand that. I do think it's very highly unlikely that anything such as Auburn moving to the East, which I do think would simplify the process, will ever happen. So what if you did what the ACC did, where you redrew the divisions, not based on geography, but simply based on competitiveness? So I divided it into 2 divisions here. We can workshop the names later, but we'll call it the blue and the yellow division. And you would have 1 crossover rival if that's something you still wanted to do. In the blue division, you would have Alabama, Miss State, Tennessee, Florida, Missouri, Arkansas, and Kentucky. In the yellow division, you would have Auburn, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt, Georgia, Texas A&M, LSU, and South Carolina. You can see who their crossover would be as to who their name is beside. We'll see. Of course, if you did something like this, I just kind of spitballed the divisions. I didn't put a whole lot of thought into it, but if you did something like this, you would get to keep certain rivalries that actually matter. You would emphasize the history of some of these teams and get to keep them from playing, some teams that they don't have anything in common with, and create some new rivalries as some of these teams play each other for the first time every single year. Play each other every single year for the first time. That was the better way to put that. So there you have it. There's kind of my pitch and my idea. Do you think, as a beginning point, that the SEC even needs to update their divisions? Maybe they don't. There is a chance, and this is something I kind of believe, that right now the West is dominant, but in 10 years, I think we may be looking at an SEC East that's dominant and wondering, well, we need to split it up because it's not fair that the West has to play the East. It's the way it tends to go. College football is a very cyclical kind of game. I do think it'll come around. The West is not going to be dominant forever. That's not going to happen. So do you even think they need to update the divisions? For some reason, that's really hard to say if I say it fast. Do you think they even need to do that, or should they just wait it out? Do you think Auburn moving to the East would just simply solve it? Do you think they need to redraw the way the divisions are currently? And if so, what would they look like if you were to draw them out? Let me know all that down below in the comment section. Thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure to give it a big thumbs up. You can also click on the circle right there in order to subscribe, or watch any of the other videos over there to the right that YouTube has adjusted for you on top. On the bottom, other Saturday subject videos. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Until next time. Between the East and the West it's never been in perfect harmony. They've never felt like two equal but separate divisions battling it out for supremacy. It always seems to kind of be one or the other that's been on top. When I was growing up in the 1990s, the SEC East was dominant, with teams like Steve Spurrier's Florida Fun and Gun offense, Philip Fulmer's Tennessee. Georgia was always really competitive under Mark Richt as we got into the 2000s. The East was the dominant division in the SEC because mainly of those three teams. When you get into the late 2000s and now 2010s, it's the SEC West. Now, one team from one division beating one team from another division doesn't inherently prove anything, but if we look at just the SEC championship game, you had Alabama winning the very first one over Florida in 1992, and the East pretty much winning the rest of the decade, winning 6 straight. They kind of traded into the 2000s. Now, in 2008, Florida beat Alabama in a number 1 versus number 2 kind of de facto national championship game. The East hasn't won a single SEC championship game since. I'm filming this before... Hey Lifers, Dustin here, and in 1992, under SEC Commissioner Roy Kramer, the Southeastern Conference added Arkansas and South Carolina and split their 12-team conference into 2 6-team divisions, and pretty much from the get-go, it has always been kind of wacky in the way that it went. So, if you look at the way the power struggle between the 2017 SEC Championship between Auburn and Georgia, for the record, so I don't know how that one ends, but up and through the 2016 season, the SEC West has won every single conference championship game since then. During that span, the West is a perfect 8-0 against the East in these games, and with every game except for the 2012 Alabama-Georgia game, where number 2 versus number 3